I have one significant breaking news item today. Um, you may know Andrew Light. He was the former Assistant Secretary in the Department of Energy of the US during the Biden administration. And he spoke at a conference last week on engineering our planet. And he spoke on the current status of international governance for SRM. I was delighted to see that he pointed out that currently, although there is no multilateral governance mechanism for SRM, there have been a number of previous initiatives that could provide a possible mechanism for moving us forward on this. And he emphasized the development of a club of countries that could be built from the bottom up, which was the way that the agreements on short-lived pollutants were developed. And he proposed to bring together a small group of countries, particularly ones in good standing in the Paris Agreement with the implementation of their NDCs, and that some of these countries may want to, in quotes, try something on SRM. Now, you'll recall that Pascal Lamy last year declared his belief that it was high time to begin to explore the development of a first movers coalition of climate vulnerable countries during his keynote speech at the Cape Town Global Summit on sunlight reflection last May. We know that not many influential people have gone so far as to directly call for such a first movers coalition, but clearly the idea is growing. Now, our mission in Healthy Planet Action is to advocate that the world community come together urgently to carry out an equitable, science-based plan of action that includes what HPAC calls the climate triad: cool, reduce, and remove. We need to spend more time thinking about the elements of such a plan, especially as we go closer to realizing a first movers coalition. Which brings us to our topic today in the members forum, which deals with the elements of such a plan. Dan Miller had laid out a 20-point plan to comprehensively address the global heating emergency several years ago. And we are delighted, Dan, to have you with us today to describe the plan and to stimulate our thinking about it. Dan, as you know, is deeply involved in climate advocacy and education and hosts the popular YouTube video channel, Climate Chat. And on that channel, I would add, he has been forthright in discussing his conclusion that the deployment of SRM is needed as part of a comprehensive climate plan. And you can read much more about his background in our announcement of this session. So it gives me great pleasure, Dan, to give the floor to you to present your 20-point plan to actually fight climate change. Dan,
Great.
over to you.
Well, thank you. And you hopefully see a title slide there with
It's up.
Crying glacier. Okay.
It's there, yes.
So I just want to, since you guys know all about this, and I'm going to just quickly go through a very high level, the climate problem from a systems perspective. We basically dug up 700 billion tons of geologically stored carbon in the form of fossil fuels and burned it, and that results in 2.7 trillion tons of CO2 emitted so far. Now, that's not how much ends up added to the atmosphere, because some of it's absorbed by the oceans and plants and soils. But that if you're going to remove it, that's how much you have to remove to get back to zero. Because if you take out some, then the oceans will put it back in the atmosphere, the stuff it took out. This has increased CO2 by about 50%, from 280 to 420 parts per million. But when you add in methane and nitrous oxide and the other greenhouse gases that humans have emitted, and that brings us to the point where our climate forcing is 2 times CO2e. And I think you folks know all about that, so we're not going to spend time on that. But in addition to fossil fuel emissions, there's also deforestation, animal agriculture, and things like that that also contribute to warming and also need to be addressed. And the latest news in climate science over the past couple of years is that according to Jim Hansen, and he's almost always right, climate sensitivity is about 50% higher than kind of assumed. The 3-degree climate sensitivity, he says, is closer to 4.5 degree. And he has a lot of evidence to show that's true. But again, that's a whole hour right there, so we're not going to do that. Now, what are the challenges to finding climate solutions? Well, we have to do mitigation, which means, reducing and eliminating our emissions, and then carbon dioxide removal. But they operate over very long timescales. It'll be decades before you even notice that you did them. And so when things are getting bad, it's not going to help politicians much to have this expensive program, and then the public doesn't even notice anything happened. And then the other issue is that even if we eliminate our emissions 100%, that would only reduce the growth rate in cumulative emissions by 1.5%. And that just gives you a perspective of how much CO2 we've already emitted. So basically, we're emitting about 40 gigatons a year of fossil fuel emissions, and there's 2.7 trillion tons of cumulative emissions. So 40 divided by 270 is 1.5%. And of course, the main thing, which you folks know all about, is that at this point, it's actually impossible to avoid greater than 2 degrees of warming, probably 3, but certainly 2, which is catastrophic on its own accord. And it also, at this point, means that if all we did was mitigate or try to mitigate our emissions, we would definitely cross irreversible tipping points. That's what tipping points are. They are irreversible on human timescales. So that means we have to do more than just mitigation. So what do we need to do? Well, we still actually have to eliminate our fossil fuel emissions. We have to do that. And we're going to discuss the different options for doing that. We also have to stop land use emissions and degradation like deforestation. We have to remove our past emissions. And we have to cool the planet while we do the above, while we cut our emissions and remove past emissions. But in addition to all of those things, we still have to protect biodiversity, because we could solve climate change and just lose biodiversity and we're still screwed. And even if we do a great job and follow everything in this plan, we're still going to be walloped by climate impacts for a long time to come. So we have to learn to adapt to them. And then if we're focused on humanity, we have to make sure that especially vulnerable communities have the services and protections they need, and we have to do it in an equitable and just way. So how do we do it? Well, we need policies. We could spend a long time to get a lot of pushback from people who think that voluntary, reducing your carbon footprint is the way to go. And it's theoretically not even possible to do it that way. But it is possible to do it with policies. But these policies need to be simple, so they're understandable by everyone, including the public. They have to be fair and just, of course, but they also have to be understandable and effective. And all these things, it's not actually hard to come up with these, but we don't tend to do it this way. You can look at cap and trade policies, and it's something that only political wonks could love and understand. And they turn out not to be effective either because of the complexities and the ability to game the system. But simple and effective policies are very hard to game if what you want to do is sort of the subject of the policy, as we'll see in the next slide. These policies have to work at the global level because climate change is a global problem. But they also have to be effective at a country level because they're going to be implemented first at the country level. And so, and you can't have too many policies. You can see my 20-point plan, but when you really look at it, it's really a 5-point plan. There's 9 policies all related to eliminate fossil fuel emissions, for example. And so, I think if this was going to be packaged for policymakers, we would probably restructure it into a smaller number of policies, distinct policies. So it's really, what level are you going to look at it? And some of these policies require a lot more detail than I'm providing in a single line here. So let's first focus on the big one of how do you eliminate fossil fuel emissions? There's basically 3 ways. You can probably come up with more, but the 3 basic ways are, first of all, you can subsidize renewables. And this is the main current policy mechanism for eliminating fossil fuels. The theory is if you deploy a lot of clean energy, it will reduce the need for dirty energy. It's a nice theory, but it turns out not to be true in practice because we've done it now and we've deployed lots and lots of renewable energy, and fossil fuel emissions are at an all-time high. So by definition, renewable energy on the whole, on the global net level, have not reduced fossil fuel emissions. Now, you can argue that, well, there would have been more fossil fuel emissions if not for renewable energy. And that probably is true. But it actually also doesn't matter because our job is we have to get rid of fossil fuel emissions as soon as possible. They must drop dramatically and urgently, and they're not doing that. And this chart is often used to show the success of renewable energy. You can see that the solar line is crossing the coal line right about now in 2026. And that might even be true. But it turns out that the amount of renewable energy that we produce is irrelevant to climate change. It doesn't cause climate change and it doesn't stop climate change. It's
Where is
neutral.
oil on this? Where is oil on this?
Um, I don't know, actually. This is IEA. You could look it up on the World Energy Outlook 2022.
All right,
Fossil
thanks.
fuel capacity.
Rarely used to generate electricity.
Yeah, this might be, it could be cumulative power. It might be electric power. So I don't know. But
Okay.
since it has solar doing so much, it probably is. Because remember, electricity is only 25% of world energy. So, and this one shows solar being high. So, but still, they're showing that solar is doing this great job. But look at the fossil fuel lines of coal and natural gas. They're all continuing on their, maybe they're not growing anymore, but they're just continuing on. And that shows actually that we're failing. So this chart that people use to show we're succeeding is actually a chart that shows we're failing. So
So
subsidizing
Dan, are you doing
renewables-
screen share? Are you
Yeah,
doing
can you
screen
see it?
share? No.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Well,
it's just
everyone else
me
sees
or
it, right?
Yeah, I
Maybe.
see it. I see it.
Yeah, it's there.
okay. All right.
There you go. Anyway, so subsidizing renewables gets you more renewables, no question about it. But it doesn't necessarily get you less fossil fuels. The next way to do it is to put a price on carbon to make fossil fuels very expensive compared to renewables. And this is done. Europe has a ETS. California has this. And everyone did cap and trade. It's maybe hard to see on this chart, but cap and trade is on this column. It is the worst of all possible carbon pricing policies. And the reason it's done is because, well, first of all, policy wonks love it because it's really kind of cool from a policy wonk. And it's theoretically, the most efficient way to sort of allocate resources for reducing fossil fuel emissions. But it's only theoretically true. It's not true in practice. In fact, it's a terrible way to do it in practice. And again, this deserves a whole hour here, but and I do have a report I wrote with Jim Hansen on this that you can find online. The best way to price carbon. That's what this is from. But basically, with cap and trade, you never know what the future price is going to be. It varies with whatever is happening in the economy and new technologies, and also the public would never accept a very high carbon price under these conditions. But with fee and dividend, which is you take 100% of the money collected, give it 100% back to the public on an equal basis. So poor people actually make money on the deal, and actually the middle class make money on the deal. Only the rich who make a lot of CO2 emissions don't make money on the deal. They're happy because they're making money on the deal, so they want the price to go up. And it's a high price that does the work of eliminating the fossil fuels. So the fossil fuel companies like this idea as long as the price doesn't go over $50 a ton. And they support that, by the way. They actually pretend that they support fee and dividend with a tricked fee and dividend plan that keeps the price at $50. But a true fee and dividend that goes up to $100, $200, $300, they don't like that. But that's the one that would work, and the public would support it if it was done well. And also, you always know what the price will be, so people actually plan on it. So this would be effective only if done correctly, and so far it's not really done correctly. So That's pricing carbon. And the third and most effective way to phase out fossil fuels is, drum roll please, phase out fossil fuels. It sounds really simple, and it is really simple. When we found there was a problem with asbestos, what did we do? Did we put a price on asbestos? Did we, did we subsidize the alternative? No, we banned asbestos, and lo and behold, all of these alternatives came up very quickly and replaced it. And also with the ozone hole, the Montreal Protocol, we banned CFCs, and lo and behold, things came to replace them. So that's the way you do it. But this idea that to phase out fossil fuels, you phase them out, is almost not discussed. It's almost as if it didn't exist as a possibility. It's very strange. I mean, I think there are exceptions within maybe certain progressive countries that talk about doing these kinds of things. But like in the US, it's not even a subject. I mean, it's not even talked about at all. And it's kind of strange because it is the most effective way to do it. And if you did phase out fossil fuels, then renewables would grow and fill in all the places where the fossil fuels are going. And so instead of renewables just adding to energy supply, which is what's happening now, instead, they would actually replace fossil fuels, which is what you want. And you're also guaranteed, if you do it right, that fossil fuel emissions will end on the date that you pick to phase it out. Now, by the way, I'm not saying any of these things are easy politically today. They are actually all simple policies. They're all understandable. They could all be passed tomorrow in Congress. I mean, theoretically, there's nothing like super complicated or new science needed to make them happen. So they're all possible. They're outside of the Overton window for now. So that's what you do with fossil fuels. Now, here is my actual policies for fossil fuels. You ban them. You start off by banning all new fossil fuel infrastructure. This is what the IEA said years ago that we had to do. You stop all subsidies. Those two things alone would have a huge impact. We're subsidizing fossil fuels by trillions of dollars a year when you take direct and indirect. And take a look at Iran war now, too, and what's going on there. You implement carbon fee and dividend also, just to have sort of a double whammy on phasing out fossil fuels. And then you ban the sale of fossil fuel cars starting in 2030, which again won't even be a big deal because they'll all be the cheapest, best cars by then for sure. They already are, but by then. You phase out production of fossil fuel electricity by 2035. That's also easy because renewable energy is cheaper now than fossil fuels, and 10 years from now, it'll be like maybe 60 to 80% less than it is now. So only saving money at that point. The hard thing is the phase out of other fossil fuel energy used for industrial process heat and also for heating buildings. And you do that by paying for heat pumps in all new buildings. It sounds crazy, but there are places like Italy, which had 100%, or I think higher, 110% tax rebate for doing it, and Sweden, where I believe they paid for it all. And if you do that, the cost sounds like a lot, but it's way, way cheaper than the damage cost of not doing it. And so you do a very aggressive way to get rid of all natural gas and oil heating, and then you get industries to either use carbon capture. We'll talk about this a little bit later. Like a cement plant might be difficult in 20 years to get rid of all the cement plants, but you could put carbon capture on all of them, and that is possible today. You got to get rid of all the methane leaks. There's sometimes policies to do this haphazardly. We've got to do it really well. And then also get all companies to disclose their direct and indirect emissions and climate risks, because it's hard to do things if you don't measure them. And so we want to measure those as well. Okay, so what else? We need clean energy policies, but it turns out that's the easy part. You don't really have to, if you get rid of fossil fuels, renewable energy is going to scale like crazy and you don't really have to do anything. But you do need to make the attaching of renewable projects to the grid easier. Right now, there's a huge backlog of things, of solar and wind projects that want to connect to the grid. You have to fix that, and you need to upgrade the grid so that all that can happen. So that's a big thing. Well, the first part's pretty easy, but the second part is a major thing and has to be done. They're doing it in China right now. We could do it too. In the United States. This is global, remember. We have to increase clean energy technology R&D funding by 10 to 100 times what it is now. Well, it also would still be a tiny number in the overall scheme of things. But that would put the pipeline for better and better renewable energy into the future. Cheaper batteries, cheaper solar, which is already amazingly cheap and getting cheaper all the time. Okay. We also need to protect biodiversity because, again, we can fix climate change and biodiversity gets destroyed and we're still screwed, and as well as all the animals and plants. So we have to ban deforestation and implement satellite monitoring and enforcement. I worked on Landsat satellites almost 50 years ago, and I was just at a conference a week or two ago where I met the folks from Planet Lab, which have little tiny satellites that take a picture of every place on Earth every single day. And they actually said this is now being used for deforestation policy enforcement in Brazil, for example. So this is something that's actually starting to happen. It's not just theoretical. That was great news, but we have to do it really much larger scale. Because you can actually see when the road gets built, the very beginning of the road being built into the forest, and you can stop it then rather than waiting months until after a lot of damage is done. We have to implement agriculture policies, including a carbon fee for meat. Cows are a big, as bad as cars when it comes to climate change. People think it's even bigger than that if you take into account that 1/3 of all the non-ice covered land on Earth is used for meat production. 1/3 of all the non-ice covered land on Earth is used for meat production. And so if you stopped meat production, then a lot of that land could go back to growing things. But you got to be a little careful because sometimes, even though you'll be absorbing CO2 by growing trees, they're dark trees where there used to be light-colored pasture, and you can screw around with the albedo. So it's not as simple as it sounds, but it's still, we have to deal with the methane and the deforestation that comes from meat. And also, just as a general thing, we got to put aside 50% of all lands and oceans for nature. I spoke to Sylvia Earle about this. You might know who she is. She's a famous oceanographer. She said we have to put aside 100% of the oceans for nature. And I said, well, you mean that would eliminate all fishing and everything? She says, that's right. And if you don't do it, you're not going to have any fishing anyway. So she's more aggressive than I am on that one. And CDR and SRM, I know two important subjects for this group. We have to develop, scale, and deploy carbon dioxide removal. And we have to increase research into SRM. But I went into a little more detail on it here. CDR will not scale unless it's either required or someone's willing to pay for it. I mean, the government. That's it. Everyone thinks, oh, it doesn't scale. Where's the technology? It's simple. It's free to pollute the atmosphere with CO2. So no one's going to pay money to capture CO2 unless they're required to do it or someone will pay for it. It's really simple. And if you do those things, then it will scale. Now, I think we should be using CDR as an offset to some fossil fuel emissions. For example, aviation. Yeah, we'll get electric planes someday and everything, but we want to start right now. And if airlines had to buy certified carbon removal credits, they could not only offset the airplane, but they can offset the ground equipment and the airport terminal and everything. That would also help scale DAC in a very efficient way. And if it's $100 a ton, once it scales, that's only $1 a gallon of airline fuel, which just went up by $2 or $3, right? So, and SRM, I did this a long time ago, so I just had this one little line about increasing research. But really, at this point, we have to be aggressive with SRM. We have to do, the research has to include atmospheric testing, and we have to actually prepare to deploy at scale in less than a decade. Because when it comes to AMOC collapse, we probably have years, not decades. And SRM is the only way I know of that could theoretically prevent AMOC collapse. And AMOC collapse is the mother of all tipping points in the near term. What else? So we also, excuse me, we also have to help fund the clean energy transition in the global south. We have to fund adaptation R&D because, as I pointed out earlier, no matter if we do this really well, really soon, we're still going to have incredible amount of climate disasters, and we've got to figure out how to try to adapt to those. We have to promote education of women and family planning. That's a key way of lowering population growth. Yeah, it's a fair and just way to do it, and having less people on the planet will make things easier. And we also have to have the one sort of targeted thing, require energy use reduction by the top 10% of emitters, which are, by the way, all Americans really. And because the top 10% is 50% of all emissions. So that is that. This is the plan at 20 points, but you can see it's really sort of 5 major points. And with that, we can go to, that was a little bit over, well, it's about 25 minutes, so not too bad. But anyway, so that's a quick overview of the 20-point plan, and let's get going on questions. And Robert, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Because I was muted. I am now not muted. That was a great presentation. It was.
Thank you.
We've heard it all before, and it doesn't matter how many times we hear it. It's good to hear it repeated because it needs to be repeated. I have just one question. How do we make all that happen?
Well, that's a good question. And I'm going to tell the history of this is I was like sitting around thinking about, I've heard of all these individual people have this great idea on how to fight climate change, and they have this one idea or the other idea, but I never heard sort of a collection all in one place. So I decided to write it down. And then I thought about it, and I realized I'm not like this incredibly smartest person in the world. These are all obvious things to do, right? Ultimately, I collected them all in one place, but they're really all obvious. They're all very doable. And yet we're, especially at that point, like 4 years ago, we're not doing any of them. And then it got me to thinking. So I did a whole other list of the reasons we're not doing anything. And I call that my barriers to climate action. That is a very daunting list. Yes, it includes fossil fuel disinformation and all that kind of stuff. But that actually is only one of 30 reasons why we don't. So there's a lot of reasons why we don't fight climate change. I did a whole show on this like a month ago. One of the biggest ones is optimism bias among the people who believe in climate change, right? Not the deniers. There's a lot of, there's deniers, but they're a relatively small number. But of this 60, 70% of people who believe in climate change and want action on it, there is this optimism bias, which means they don't vote on it. They don't talk about it. They don't, they're not walking around really worried about it like they should. So the answer to your question is there's lots of reasons why we don't do it. The one thing that will make us pay attention to it is that climate change is getting worse and worse. The damage is getting very clear. And that's the only thing I've seen in my 20 plus years of working on this that made any difference in the conversation was that climate change impacts being viewed as climate change impacts happening. The car soup, watching cars float down this city, like every few days you see that, right? So I think it will happen. The question is, will it happen soon enough? And then we have to be smart on how to get the world, or at least policymakers, to pay attention. And I spend more and more time on my show talking about that than I do about the climate science, because we know all the climate science we need to know, and we have all the solutions we need to get started. And again, all the stuff I showed you, this would be great for the economy. This is not like, go live in a cave stuff. This is like, think about what happened when we had to, they had the 2000 the year 2000 bug that we were all worried about, and everyone had to buy new computers and everything. It helped the economy a lot. All this money went into fixing this one little software bug. This will be that on steroids. It will help the economy, help health.
Can I just make one sort of follow-on question? Do you not think that doing all of this, or doing most of this, implies some redistribution of wealth, power, and status across both within nations and between nations? And that is the biggest hindrance to making progress.
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, in terms of fossil fuel interests, of course, absolutely. But just take a look what China's doing. China's doing this now. They're scaling up renewables incredibly. They're protecting themselves from the Iran oil shock because they're 50% EV sales already. I was just over there. I mean, EVs everywhere. They're really good too, by the way, nicer than we get here. And so they're so yes, there will be countries like China and others who no longer are dependent on the fossil fuel powers of the world. The petrostates will lose power, of course. Yeah. And they don't want to, by the way, and they'll fight it tooth and nail.
Mhm. Yep. Okay, let's move on. Greg Slater is next, then Robert Tulip, then Mike McCracken. Greg?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I'd be interested in seeing your collection of reasons why these things are hard. Doing your 20-point plan is hard. I'd like you to add that. But my question is on the SRM. You said, I didn't have the phraseology exactly, but you said SRM, we have to do SRM aggressively, et cetera, including outdoor experiments. And so my questions on that are, first of all, define SRM for you. Are we talking about SAI principally, or are you talking about marine cloud blighting? All of them we're pushing on. Secondly, what does that mean? I mean, you know, I'd like to hear people say we should do SAI at 10 kilotons like tomorrow. Or are you saying, you say you give a 10-year horizon, but what are the intermediate benchmarks to get there? Because people have been saying, it's going to, well, if you listen to Wade Smith, who's probably been on your show, it's 30 years just to build the planes, which I don't agree with, because I'm pretty sure we can do it without those planes, or at least start it. But in any case, I'd like a little more detail on your SRM plan.
Mhm.
Well, first of all, I'm going to have Doug McMartin on not this Sunday, but the Sunday after, so you can listen to that. I've had him on before and other many SRM programs. So there's an SRM playlist that you can see. So a lot of this is covered in details. But quickly, I saw a story this morning that we can use regular Boeing 777 freighters, because you got to remember where we want to deploy. Now we're talking about SAI for a moment. If we're doing SAI, you want to deploy it around the Arctic. It turns out the stratosphere is lower in the Arctic and the Antarctic than it is in the tropics. And so actually regular planes can reach 45,000 feet, which is, I think, roughly, 45, 50,000. That's where it is. And so that's possible to get started already with that. And again, it's not 10 years. If we wanted, if it was a national emergency, we could obviously slap some extra engines on an existing plane, give them some bigger wings, and you'd be there anyway. That's not really the key. The key is understanding the impacts, trying the experiments, trying 10 kilotons, whatever the number is. I think we should try everything. I think we should also do marine cloud brightening. I think the dark horse is nanobubbles, by the way, which is sort of the inverse of marine cloud brightening. Instead of putting water droplets in the air, you put air in the water. And it turns out it works the same way. The physics are the same. It turns out you get that white foam you see on the white caps, right? And if you add some surfactants, you can get it to last a long time. The key is to make it last a long time. It lasts a decent amount of time in the atmosphere. It doesn't last as long in the water unless it has certain conditions. And then it can actually last a long time. I don't know if you ever gone to the beach and actually see foam sitting on the sand, and it's like solid, you can touch it, right? So there are ways of doing that. And I think we should also look into space-based system. That's going to take longer, but it's worth working on now to take a look at if the Starship really works and everything and can do what it thinks it can do to go to the moon, it can certainly launch what's needed to do it in space as well.
Mhm. Okay, very good. Let's move on to Robert Tulip.
Thanks, Dan. Fantastic work, and Climate Chat is really one of the best podcasts around. So I always listen and just love it. One thing where I disagree with you, I suppose, follows on from Robert Chris's point about the politics. Just that the scale of vested interests and inertia in the fossil economy is so great that making rapid climate impact by attacking that complex is just really problematic. And so I was really intrigued by Brian von Herzen's argument in his presentation with you just recently that marine permaculture, if you scaled it up, and this was an implication of what he said, not explicit, if you scaled up marine permaculture with kelp arrays to 1% of the world ocean, then that would sequester 100 gigatons of CO2 per year. And so it's this argument that ocean photosynthesis has got the potential to remove more CO2 than all emissions, and so is likely to be a more effective way of fixing the carbon problem than a frontal assault on the fossil economy, which we've seen from Trump and others that they resist very effectively, and so trying to find a way of both rapidly deploying SRM, and my view on that is that what's needed is industrial partnerships. Find the commercial industries who face the biggest hit from heat, and especially insurance, agriculture, tourism, and so on, and get them to ally. But part of the problem is that they don't really want to sign up to the sort of full frontal attack on the fossil economy that you're advocating.
Well, first of all, I'm all for doing everything. I like what Brian's doing, and if it proves out at scale, which it hasn't done yet, and it actually is working and whatever, and then by the time it's proven at scale, people will be. The one thing you can count on is that people will be more scared sort of every year going forward from now. I mean, next year we're going to be hitting 1.7 or maybe looks like could be 1.8 degrees for a 12-month average, not the calendar month, but the trailing 12 months, which is crazy, and that's going to cause all kinds of problems. This year in California and the West, we just had this crazy heat wave. Okay, well, it was a crazy heat wave. It melted all the snow. So now there's no water. It's like going to be one of the biggest droughts we've ever had because of this crazy heat wave. So all these things interact, and so people are going to be more and more scared, and they're going to start. The question is when. I'm worried about that optimism bias, but when will they start demanding action? Now, I do think that what Brian's doing is great. Hey, if iron fertilization works, great. Let's do it. Anything, we can try everything, see what works. Now, at the same time, I think you do try to go after, it's the Overton window, right? It was the thought of gay marriage in the United States it wasn't even something you could even imagine thinking about, let's say 100 years earlier. I mean, it wasn't even a concept. It was impossible. It was like a fairy tale thing to even say it. And then it became, something that people were against, and then there was something that people weren't so much against, and then it happened. And, it's going to be the same thing here. It's going to be, when does the damage override the fossil fuel interest? And I totally agree with you that right now, there's no fucking way, that we can do it today. But I don't know I don't know how fast it's going to change when the damage comes fast and furious. Look what happened in Ministry of the Future, Chapter 1, right? Something like that happens and it might change the world's attitudes.
But do you have your own optimism bias with the technical feasibility of phasing out fossil fuels and still delivering energy?
Oh, that maybe the answer is yes. I think I just do the thought experiment. What if let's just say we all of a sudden realize we don't have fossil fuels, and we're hitting it, and it's scaling down in the next 40 years, right? We're going to be at zero for sure, no matter what. I mean, just for physical constraints, not policy. Would we be able to build a world that was operating well? Yes, of course we could. It might be hard. I know we have to struggle at it. I don't know. But actually, with the price of batteries falling 90% in 10 years and solar 80 or 90, solar's dropped 99% in cost in like 30 years, right? And batteries too, different starting points. But so, yeah, I think we could. Now, it won't be the same world, but it'll be a decent world. Yeah, by the way, it won't be a decent world because of climate change, but that I'm talking about just from an energy perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Let's turn over to Mike McCracken for a question.
Thank you, Dan. I actually have several comments, but I'll do focus on one. I guess I'm surprised. I guess you haven't had an interview with Sandy McDonald or Mike Nelson, for example, about what to do to the transmission grid. So if you look at Antelope Valley, California on Google Earth and look just to the west of it, what you see is this big black spot on the desert. And what happened was California put in something like a $3 billion transmission line from this waste desert area and connected it to the main line grid, its remote site. And it led to $60 billion of private investment putting in solar and wind by Buffett and Google and everybody else or something. And so California is basically decarbonizing. What are they doing? They're now going to put in a $9 billion line and have even more going from some of parts of the Central Valley because you can harvest solar radiation at about $40,000 per acre out there when the cost is only 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that's lower than the price of basically any of the energy forms. Natural gas, maybe if you're lucky, it was 3 cents, but now you can't get turbines anymore. Coal is 9 and nuclear is 18 or whatever it is for new plants. And what Sandy McDonald proposed 10 years ago now was to put in a high voltage direct current line, which is the only way to get electricity over long distances. We have plenty of renewables in the US. We don't have a national network to do it. It's like, as they say, and these people have heard it before from me, the present transmission grid is like the old US highway system, 300 miles and spend the night or something like that, where what a HVDC line network would do is a rough network in every supplement is a super highway to get across. And it's basically very low cost. The estimate is, maybe 1.5 or 2 cents per kilowatt hour as a transmission fee, and it pays for itself. So it doesn't even really take government to build it. You're going to build it with bonds that repay, like on toll highways or something that are done by the private sector. And it just makes a tremendous amount of sense. And he's got a book in progress that talks about doing it around the world, that every continent needs to do it. If you could supply, this notion in the negotiations of loss and damage, the idea that 1 billion people are going to support loss and damage recovery for 7 or 8 billion people around the world on an indefinite basis, I just don't believe is workable. But if you basically were to have the developed world pay for high voltage direct current electric transmission, so they all had lots of electricity from solar farms in the Sahara or wherever, if they'd have low cost electricity, they have plenty of labor, and they'd have economic development that would help them eventually pay for, take over loss and damage for themselves and design better. So I guess your whole first 10
But I have that
things-
in there, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, I know, but it's number 10, and it's sort of the second part of number 10.
I know. I'm trying to make everything compact. This is a very short phrase. It's not an easy. I think I commented on it. It's not necessarily. It's not a small thing. It's a big thing. But I was sort of hiding it in there in a way. I wasn't paying attention to it, but it was a key. It's a key element. I agree with you. Now, on the other side of it, I think in a lot of developing countries, it's less important because they're going to be using distributed energy and using it locally. That's the cheapest way and most robust way. That doesn't mean they won't be cities connected, whatever. But, I think there's a mix of all of that. But I totally agree with you that upgrading, and they're doing it in China right now, right? They're surpassing us in energy generation.
Yeah.
And they're putting in these direct current things and everything. So we can learn from them.
Yes.
With robots, by the way, wiring it is really kind of cool what they're doing.
Yeah. Let's move on. We have Aria, then Glenn. Aria.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
I don't know if we formally met before or not, but great to meet you. And thank you for all the work you're doing. getting the conversations out there. I really appreciate that. So I've got a couple of comments I wanted to make on the plan. And then I also want to share something with you that I'm hoping will really help all of us really amplify the messaging around all of this. So first of all, I'm really glad that you put in ending subsidies, because I feel
Pretty
like
obvious.
the bottom line, I mean, I love putting a price on carbon. I mean, I used to lobby with CCL, but we've been trying for a really long time. And ending subsidies should fall in line with the conservative mindset. And
of course, but it doesn't, but it should. You're right. They ignore it. They ignore it.
But anyways, that I think would really go very far. But also, making polluters pay is another way to, another spin on putting a price on carbon that gets a lot of support from a lot of people in terms of just the messaging spin on it.
Yeah, and by the way, I was not doing messaging, and this plan is not written. And I've done total show. David Fenton, you might know, on how to frame all of this. We have to frame, especially pricing carbon, by the way. It's not something that CCL has done a good job. Naming fee and dividend is a terrible name and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. No, I love that. But one of the things I was wanting to add to that in terms of the making polluters pay is that one of the things that we don't talk about a lot are the prices of a renewable energy infrastructure as well. And that regardless of what kind of energy system we're putting in, we need to have a sense of responsibility about what the impacts of that are, whether it's the mining of the bottom of the oceans or, other kinds of environmental damage that gets done. So I love the idea of making polluters pay would be so all-encompassing and really add a lot of enforcement to just personal responsibility as we, move forward on the transition. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there with the narrative.
But the one thing I said about that is, if we switch to 100% renewables, and I understand we'd need about 4 times more minerals, copper and aluminum, all that kind of stuff, to do that than we're currently mining today. But if we did that and stop fossil fuels, we would reduce mining by 99%, because fossil fuel mining is 500 times more than the increased amount of mining we would need if we went to 100% renewables. So there's really no, as Bill McKibben said, one ship filled with solar panels eliminates 100 ships filled with fossil fuels, right? So, I wouldn't, I mean, there's so many problems. We have to fight environmental damage everywhere. I totally agree. But there's really one thing to really focus on, and that is the fossil fuels, which are causing problems. The other problems last for a while, I guess, but the other fossil fuel damage lasts for 500,000 years. You can listen to one of my first YouTube, it actually was originally on Clubhouse, but first YouTube video with David Archer talking about the true cost of fossil fuel, the social cost. If you don't have a discount rate, it's $28,000 a ton of CO2 if you don't put a discount rate. And we do put a discount rate because we don't care what happens to our grandchildren. We count every dollar of damage as being a penny, 100 years from now. And so we don't count it as real. But we're talking about the end of all coastal cities, and we don't care. It doesn't
I'm
count
living in a coastal city, by the way. I'm on the edge of the seat here.
I think you got a little time. You got a little time, but not 100 years.
Yeah.
So anyway,
one of the other things I don't really know the answer to in terms of the impacts, but I do know that when it comes to agriculture and cows, for instance, that there are a lot of things we can do to really reduce that impact. And so, as far as regenerative agriculture, the kind of composting, sort of integrating them with nature, and seaweed and garlic added to their feed, all of that. I don't know how much.
Not all of it, by the way. I don't. Alan Savory. You might have seen his
Yeah.
TED talk on this. That was BS, by the way. TED never
What?
should have shown that talk. That was where if you rotate the cows, it won't be that bad and all that kind of stuff. And it's not.
And the
I don't think
additives?
it's true. No, the additives are true. It reduces methane. But see, the real
Right.
problem for cows, well, there's two big problems: methane, but also deforestation. You're feeding the
Yes.
cows. It's super inefficient going from primary food to protein from the cow, right? I forget, 20 to 1 or worse maybe for cows. It's 60 pounds. It's 60 pounds of CO2 for every pound of beef. And that's the worst. And then you go down to lamb is 20. Coffee and chocolate are also around 20. And then everything else, chicken 6. So it's 1/10 the impact of beef. And you got to look at all of it, not just the methane, but the deforestation, which is really a huge, losing the Amazon will be, partly because of beef. Right? So there's a lot to watch out for. And that's why I just had a line in there, policies for agriculture and meat, right? I didn't say what it is, but we need some really smart things to do there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So-
And I think to follow on that, Dan, I think that one of our key activities in the Healthy Planet going forward, is to fill in those schematics into a fully fleshed out plan that could contribute to the dialogue that we're talking about with the First Movers Coalition of countries. So let's think about how we can fill in the skeleton that you've created here with all the information necessary to fully understand each and every one of those points.
And if you ban deforestation, 100%, that will then force cattle producers to figure out other ways to feed them and be more efficient or somehow, so there's some things are multiple, like banning deforestation actually relates to the cows, but they're really in separate places. But you want sort of policies that are multiple lines of attack to solve a problem, not just hoping that one thing works. That's why I also had fee and dividend as well as phasing out fossil fuels.
Transforming all of our agriculture is going to, also make such a huge difference. And
it's going to transform anyway, by the way, whether we like it or not, and not necessarily in a good way. And not starting sometime far in this decade. Yeah. I mean, it's already happening, so I'm not saying anything that's smart here. But
a lot of these
this decade, we're going to see a lot more climate agriculture impacts than we've seen before.
Yeah, and a lot of these solutions also make people more resilient to the impacts of climate. So, will be a winning argument for us if we can get it out there the way we need to. So also,
but we need to move on.
I need to share something, Dennis. This is important. I have something important I wanted to share, and this is for everybody. I don't know if you saw this, Dan Miller, but Covering Climate Now just opened up an office hours where you can actually make an appointment and speak with them. And I think it would be really huge to propose to them that they do a panel with climate scientists to discuss what kind of strategy we actually need moving forward. So, I wanted to let you know about that. I had planned on reaching out, but I think you also, with how much you are out there as a journalist, I think that you would have, a lot of backing to bring this up. So I think I want to, I can forward the email.
Yeah, please do. As you can tell, I'm usually interested in talking about climate change. I want to clarify one thing. It said, where did the fossil fuels last 500,000 years? This is that part of the damage continues for 500,000 years. You should listen to the podcast with David Archer for more detail. But, basically there's a half-life and everything, but I don't remember what percent, but some percent of the fossil fuels you emit today remain in the atmosphere at the end of 500,000 years. Now, most of the damage is happening in the hundreds to thousands of years, but some of it does continue. And the amazing thing, which sounds crazy, that I think I got from David, is that you burn 1 gallon of fossil fuels today, and you add up its warming impact over the next 500,000 years, which includes, its tail going off to zero. And the energy equivalent is one Hiroshima atomic bomb for each 1 gallon of fossil fuels that you burn. Now, that's over a very long time frame, so it sounds like it's happening today. It's not happening today. It's a little bit of energy over a very, very long time frame. But
Very overwhelming.
people don't get that. But even today, I mean, it's so 0.6. I did this with Jim Hansen. 0.6 watts per square meter. It's now 1.4. The energy imbalance is equivalent to 400,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs going off each and every day, which is now 1 million. Literally, the energy equivalent of 1 million Hiroshima atomic bombs going off each and every day is what is warming the Earth right now. That's the energy imbalance that's warming the Earth. And people have no clue what's going on.
Amazing. Yeah. Well,
So
Arya,
anyway, I
we'll
just
pick up
answered
on
that in the comments there.
Yeah, we'll pick up on the climate now developments and put some more emphasis on that as we go forward. Now we have Glenn Weinrob, then Jonathan Cole. Glenn?
Oh, yeah. The question I have is you've got point number 11, which is increase R&D 10 to 100-fold. And then the question is, okay, what kind of things might be developed? And in theory, a professor of fission, nuclear fission may have ideas of what could be done with additional money. Fusion scientists may have ideas about what could be done with money. Also, a mining professor who teaches mining, let's say at Texas A&M or Colorado School of Mines, may have ideas about what can be developed to increase our ability to do geothermal mining. And you've got a podcast where you can interview people. So the question is, have you considered interviewing people and asking them if they had billions of dollars, if you could write a check to them for billions of dollars to work in their respective fields, what would they do with that money? So, and so the question is, have you considered asking people or interviewing people to expand on your point number 11?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how important that is right now, since we have what we need to get going right now. And we're talking about, you don't know where it's going to go. I mean, obviously things like battery technology, which is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I mean, literally dropping at 90% every decade, which is insane. That's like solar panels, think how cheap solar panels are now, right? So energy storage will become very cheap. Maybe fusion will stop being something that's 20 years away forever and only be 10 years away forever. I don't know. We could get there. And lots of other things. Now, the one thing I will say I'd be very careful about is the Jevons paradox and the rebound effect. We can do a whole hour on that. I've done multiple shows on it. So it turns out that he wrote about it in 1865. It's still true today, and no one disagrees, but no one takes it into account. And that is, the more efficiently you use a resource, the more that resource is used. And so AI, I went to a Climate Week talk where a professor said, we're going to improve the energy efficiency of computers. So this could be something that they ask for, right? Money for this. We're going to improve the energy efficiency of computers so that the watt hours per operation drops. And if you want, I'll spare you the guess here. Already energy efficiency of computers have improved since the first electronic computers in the 1940s by a factor of 10 trillion times. It gets better by an order of magnitude every 6 years, constantly, forever. And the only thing that's happened is energy use has gone up. So my point being that energy efficiency is one that you have to watch out for, because that often leads to more energy. If you make a more energy efficient air conditioner, you will increase energy use. So you got to be really careful. So I'd say, with that caveat of being careful about what you do and look at the real systems level impact of it, then let's spend, again, even 100 times what we're spending now is nothing. It won't show up on the budget practically, right? We're spending very little, especially compared to what we spend on the military or something like that. I mean, it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
So just give it to everybody. That is my answer, except with those exceptions.
Yeah, Glenn Weinreb has been really spearheading the development of research proposals for, frontier research on all of the topics, and that might be an interesting topic for a podcast
Yeah,
at some point.
let's send me some information on that. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a very well-developed plan on the research budget and requirements for, further improving our technology in this area. Okay. Jonathan Cole and then Ron Bayman. Jonathan?
Great, thanks. Well, your 20-point plan is going to require a whole new mindset for our politicians. And as a Californian, have you contacted Tom Steyer and helped him with his book or with his campaign? And when you
I'm
did
one of his
that,
endorsers. Do you know Caitlin Sparks, who's running her, I don't know what you call it, I don't know, getting the people to endorse him approach. She's part of his campaign. She's a good friend of mine. Now, the only thing I worry about Tom Steyer is he better be willing to drop out of the race if he's third in line when they get close to the election, because we have a jungle primary. And right now, the two Republicans are 1 and 2. And then there's all, 10 Democrats running. And if we have 3 that are equal, Tom Steyer and Schriff and whoever the other one is right now, and they run, then we're going to end up with choice of 2 Republicans to pick from. So,
But
I support Tom because of his climate action, but just from a practical point of view, I want whoever is number 3 Democrat in the race to drop out a month before the election.
Sure. But he has enough money that he can run every 2 years for some office. And have you contributed and met with him personally?
I've met with him a bunch in the past. I haven't met with him since he's been running, and he's not asking for money. He's funding it all by himself.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, contributed.
He's a billionaire. But I've known Tom for a
ideas.
long time. I mean, not well. I mean, I've met with him a few times, and I like that he's, of all the candidates. Now, of all the candidates, he's the strongest in climate in the past. But if you look at his campaign, you've gone to his website, doesn't really mention climate. I mean, they might have changed it. It didn't say much. And he wants to be careful because he knows it doesn't poll well. I mean, people like it, but they don't vote on it. So he tries to put climate in terms of affordability and other kinds of things. So, I kind of wish he'd talk about it more, but I know the reality. The public's not responding to that right now.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Jonathan, thanks for bringing that up. Ron, and then back to Mike. Ron?
Yes, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Dan. I'm sorry I was a little late. I've been doing some other stuff, but I did want to, and I got most of your presentation, and I agree with many people have said basically we're on the same page, but I did want to just stress a couple of practical concerns. One is I wish, and I've said this before, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but the IMO regulations, whatever, we've been trying to get the IMO to at least think about the cooling impact of what they're doing, and hopefully try and address it in some way. I mean, we said you could just let the fossil fuel aerosols continue in the open ocean where it wouldn't have that much impact on human health for a little while temporarily, and develop some other kind of aerosols or other method that perhaps the ships could be useful in offsetting the termination shock, the warming termination shock that has been caused by these regulations. I think it's a really good practical measure because, for one thing, all we need is one nation or NGO with standing to submit this thing to the Marine Protection Environment Committee. And we've already talked to the chair of that committee, the chief scientist, and she's encouraged us to do that. She's on it. She says, yes, I think this is an important thing that we should take up. But you got to get somebody to submit it. I just can't do it.
I think there's multiple. You got to step back and really think about it, though. Firstly, you mentioned the health issue. This kills 8 million people a year, and I agree. Over the ocean, the impact's not that much. But at the same time, by getting rid of it and having this sudden acceleration upward, it probably going, since again, the only thing that's getting us to act, the only thing, doesn't matter. I've been giving these talks for 20 years. I said the same things 20 years ago. I'm saying now, you know, and by the way, you can look at the one like peer-reviewed paper I did was in 2010. You read it, it reads like what we're talking about today, right? So, but no one's paying any attention, and no one was. And now they're paying a little bit of attention. I think they're going to pay a lot more attention. And one reason is we're getting rid of the Faustian bargain where we're hiding the true impacts. It may be a good thing to have strong impacts in a short time in order so that we actually start doing something. Because if we sort of hide it for as long as possible, now we're really screwed, right? You know, then,
Well,
so I don't know. I'm not saying I know the answer. I'm just saying it's a little more complicated than it probably looks.
well, that I've been a lefty organizer for years. I mean, and this reminds me very much of the breakdown theory. You may be familiar with, the old CP said, we'll just wait for capitalism to collapse because, in our interpretation of Marx, that's what's going to happen, and then the revolution will come. And I have this. I've had this constant debate with my comrades and other people, as many of us know here in HPAC, we're trying to, the leftists are all waiting for the revolution to solve the climate problem. And we're saying, hey, man, that's wonderful, but it's going to take way too long. The climate change is happening much faster than human evolution, and social evolution. And on the right, they're doing the technology will solve it, or it's good, we don't need to worry about it because it's going to be too far in the future or whatever. They're in kind of this pseudo denialism because I think they're worried about all the sunk costs, the vested interests, there will be enormous ramifications for wealthy people right now. If we actually do some of the things that you're suggesting, for example, ban all this stuff, and it's not a painless transition, and the people in power and are going to be the most impacted in terms of. So I'm following kind of Robert Tish's comments.
To be clear, by the way,
there's a social political dimension to this. So anyway, but I think on this one thing, on the IMO thing, this is something that could raise awareness. It's a small step. But it's a very important step because it refocuses attention. And look, there's a termination shock here, guys. This was not necessary. There are better ways to do this. You need to think about this. We all need to think about cooling. And of course, on the cooling dimension is something that threads the needle between the left and right. It's just a practical measure. We need a Band-Aid. Need something to save the ship while it's going under.
I do want to say, though, that my list is meant to be a list of what we do if we're rational. I'm not saying we're rational. We're obviously not rational, and that's part of what the whole barriers thing is all about. But I think it's important to have the list of what you do if you're rational, right? And it maybe help guide you towards being rational when you can see it written out and it's all kind of straightforward and you can actually imagine it all happening. It's not that hard unless you're a fossil fuel executive. But anyway, that's what I want to make that point.
Yeah. And
your list is great. Don't get me wrong.
Dan, this IMO is one of our major activities in Healthy Planet, and I think your points are interesting regarding.
Be careful.
Yeah, well,
one of the Chinese curses is "May you get what you wish for." Yeah, that's a curse. So watch out.
Okay, great. So it looks like we're getting back to our second round, and Mike, you have your hand up. Did you want to jump in again?
Okay, yeah, I want to get your insights on starting to move forward with SRM and CDR. So at the start of the meeting, Dennis mentioned an Arizona State workshop that was held last week, and I went to it. And what they had been funded to do was to go out to the communities in the country and US and Canada, it turned out, and find out about public acceptance of these approaches, CDR and solar intervention and other kind of things. And so they put together focus groups to do this, and they went out and they sort of gave them some training a little information, and then they had them do it. And it's sort of viewed as part of the governance that you have to go through. In fact, that was why DOE was funding it, thinking that you have to go through this governance and get public acceptance. And my impression at the end, after hearing them go through it, was that the framing that the people took in these workshops was all very personal. It was all about local impacts and how they would be affected. And so there were all these things about being precautionary, and it's going to take a long time, and we have to go through it and have discussion and discussion and discussion. And there was just not a real issue of urgency. And it was because the framing they were taking was local rather than the global framing that you sort of posed about at the start and that we all sort of have. And it's sort of natural, I think, for people to take local framing, and that's something we have to overcome. And we have to get, through this somehow to be thinking globally to do something, because otherwise, with all the governance discussion, we won't be anywhere for 20 years or something trying to get global governance in place. And even the issue of doing experiments, even the issue of experiments gave up. They had this new video of David Keith and a whole bunch of others that's a documentary. And if you listen to Dave at the end, and I asked the producer, Kalina, about it, my impression, and I've had a hard time personally, trying to figure out what experiments you do other than just starting to deploy and learn as you go. Just putting a little something up in the atmosphere and releasing a little bit, it doesn't give them months of time to form an aerosol, and it doesn't have aerosol around it. It'll just blow apart, and they're not going to find it. I just haven't seen reasonable experiments other than sort of engineering of how you release it or something. But
we are putting up 70 million tons a year, and no one seems
to how do we move forward? How do we move forward?
The way you do it, by the way, is you start a company. It's an advertising company, and what it does is it puts up Coca-Cola in the stratosphere. And since you're doing it not for the purpose of cooling the earth, you're doing it to make money on advertising. It's allowed. The only thing you're not allowed to do is to do it on purpose to cool the earth. We're cooling the earth by a degree right now with, fossil fuels and ships and everything. And it's all allowed because they're not doing it to cool the earth. If they did it to cool the earth, they would be banned. So I'm kind of only half joking here, but
Well, no, I think if you look at all the rockets and the aircraft that are putting stuff in there, it's far larger than any of these experiments are being talked about, or even starting to do it.
Of course. But again, the whole debate about SRM is kind of crazy, and that's why I talk about it a lot on my show. I mean, all the objections are, it has side effects. Well, so does chemotherapy, but if you know you're going to die, then you kind of do it. And that's the thing about the framing. I always joke, and it's only half a joke too, that it's like we're given the choice between winning the lottery and waterboarding. Now, which would you choose? Would you rather win the lottery, or would you rather be waterboarded? And everyone just happens to be choosing waterboarding for some reason. And it's weird, but that's what we're doing. And it's very strange. Now, I think getting back, I think it'd be really interesting to see a real honest framing of the problem, like not holding back on how bad climate change can really be and how soon it could be really bad. What does an AMOC collapse look like? What does every coastal city being gone in 100 years mean? I was working with Jim Hansen on his 2012 TED Talk, and he asked me, Dan, do you have a picture of Florida under like 15 feet of water? And I said, well, I do. But Jim, I said, I think we really should focus on this century. And he says, I am. What? And he gave me some numbers. I worked them out myself, and he was right. I mean, it's not that it will, but it's a very real possibility based on the doubling rate of Greenland melt. I mean, you can just do it yourself.
Yeah.
How to do it, Jonathan?
How much time do we have?
I'm okay. I'm whatever time you guys want.
We can go on for another 15 minutes, making it an hour and a half, I believe. Yeah. Let's see. Someone has their hand up. Oh, that's Jonathan. He's always putting his images in there. Yep, Jonathan.
Hey, thanks. So, Dan, your slide called How to Do It. You list both fair and effective in the same sentence. I'm sure that you've tried to work out how to balance those two because they work at cross purposes. If you have limited resources, like you have a farm with a bad crop year, but you've still got 8, family members to feed, the most of them are going to think it's unfair that the strongest ones who do the most work are getting all the food. And, so in other words, effective and fair are almost always at cross purposes. So how do you work out that balance?
No, I think it's tricky. I mean, as you phase out fossil fuels will get more expensive, and then the wealthy will have fossil fuels. But I think on the other side of it is that you don't have to be like literally fair to everyone, because the world is not fair to everyone now. So as long as you don't go out of your way to make it worse, and you go out of your way to make it better, I do think a world that's based on renewable energy will be inherently more fair than a world based on fossil fuels. And I think it's kind of clear why that's true, but you could spend a lot of time on that as well. And so I think when you say fair, so many policies are rigged for the electric utilities or the fossil. You just take a look at what's going on these cap and trade things where they give $1 billion of credit. Just get rid of all that stuff. Phase out fossil fuels. Promote, let renewables take their place, make that easy to connect, make it cheaper, and that will help people. And it's not that everyone gets treated the same, but it's sort of the policy itself is not biased towards, especially the elites.
Right. Well, cheap energy is certainly something that can spread the fairness more broadly. Exactly. Because even a poor person, if they can afford a gallon of gas, they can have a job that's 10 miles away or something. So, but climate change itself is going to impose a restricted resources across different areas, food, and things like that. So, the ability to be fair might reduce in a period where we restrict cheap fossil fuels.
Well, you got to remember also that what is the most unfair thing in the world? That's climate change. It hurts the people the most who had the least to do with it. And we haven't seen anything yet to what it's going to be like, right? So anything you can do to reduce the impacts of climate change is fair from that point of view. And fossil fuels are just very unjust. Even in the countries like Nigeria or something that have a lot of fossil fuels, the people don't benefit from that, right? It's the curse. It's the curse of fossil fuels, right? So it's very complicated. Now, at the same time, because climate change is the most unfair thing there is in the world, I also think that even though I put just and fair in there, I think that anything you do to stop climate action, and maybe that's what you're trying to get at, in order to be just and fair, I think is unjust. Because the climate impact, negative climate impact, will hurt the people you're trying to protect far more than whatever, make sure you don't put the CO2 sequestration site in that poor neighborhood or something like that, right? Those kinds of things and so therefore you slow it down by 5 years or whatever. That kind of thing will hurt those people far more than anything you think you're doing to help them. So it's a very complicated subject. It's not,
Are you willing to say social justice is the worst thing you can do for justice? That's basically what you're saying. Nobody says that.
No, I'm saying anytime you delay climate action, I put in there, I think you should cite the CO2 sequestration.
Yeah, but social justice
away from the poor neighborhoods. You should do all those things.
Social justice is the principal way to delay climate action.
Well, I'm saying if it doesn't have to be, but if it is used that way, then I'm saying it actually has the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve. Now, at the same time, I think you can try to be careful about how you deploy your resources to not take advantage of poor people and things like that.
The whole governance issue is about climate justice. And that's the thing that's slowing us down.
Right.
I'm
Thanks
not
for
sure
that.
that's true. I mean, I think the fossil fuel industry and that owns all the politicians are slowing us down a lot more than the people in Zambia or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we have one more hand left, and that is Aria. Back to you, Aria.
Okay, great, thanks.
So-
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what James Hansen's thoughts are about what did you guys reach in terms of how much more time my family and I have here in Florida, right on the edge of the ocean.
Well, I've known Jim for a long time, and I have to say, the fact that he supports SRM is mind-blowing. He's a very conservative guy. Like, and I've been working in carbon capture for 15 years now or something. And he at first said, carbon capture, whatever, just cut emissions. And he just saw that no one's listening to him for 40 years, right? No one's listened. He gave that talk in Congress. No one paid any attention. And his attitude now is, look, you guys haven't listened to me. We're really screwed. Here's what you got. I'm telling you what you got to do to get unscrewed. And now it includes SRM because our energy imbalance is way too high.
Yeah.
And, but so there's that. What he's talking about, if the AMOC collapses, let's see, 2050, the less heat is going to the northern hemisphere, more is going to the southern hemisphere. That stays around Antarctica, starts accelerating the melt of Antarctica. And you can have, as you said, multi-meter sea level rise in 100 years. It's happened before. It can happen again. And now, we're doing it at 100 times the speed it happened in the past, right? So it really could happen. And it's exponential, right? So you don't notice it. It's like, it goes like it shoots up and, and no one's paying attention. And that's what I did. He said the doubling time for Greenland mass ice loss is somewhere between 5 and 20 years. Just do the math. And it's I forget what it was, 1 millimeter a year now, whatever it was, something like that. Take 1 millimeter a year and do a doubling through the end of the century every 5 or 10 years. You're at, meters of sea level rise.
Hansen is very wishy-washy about actual SRM. What he doesn't say. He doesn't
He doesn't get it.
He does not advocate.
We would love to
advocate.
have him work
says
with
we
us.
need it. He says we need it.
I mean, I would love it if Hansen could work with us and we could really develop a unified voice with his credentials behind the
you're
mission.
not going to get it. I know him too well. He's like working on his book. My sister's his editor for his book, and it's way overdue. And he uses it as an excuse. I helped him do his first book, Storms of My Grandchildren. I got him got his book thing going there, but he's working on so much stuff, and I can just tell you, you're not going to get him. Everyone's always asking him to do these kinds of things, and he basically turns them all down. He did do CCL. That was
for
like
instance,
really long time ago.
A panel with Covering Climate Now to talk about what are the strategies, because that would go a long way. A lot of journalists would be right there. And they'd be.
Well, he has done the panel after his paper. He does panels, and he was on my show, and he does a little bit.
But it's just
he really doesn't like doing the public stuff, as you might have noticed.
What's that?
He doesn't like doing the public stuff, as you probably noticed, but he does do it.
He's got a very strong voice out there, and so we've got to develop a stronger voice.
Yeah, he's been using that voice to minimize Hansen's work, which is the leading work right now at the global systems level. And I have to tell you, I've looked into it a lot. I really think Hansen's right about the 4.5 degree ECS.
I don't think
it should be the biggest story, anywhere, because
Michael Manson aside, I don't think the scientific consensus of climate scientists is with Hansen. Whether they're full of shit or not, I don't know. But
no, that's true.
It's erring on the side of being conservative. I mean, scientific protocol is there for a reason, but it's not actually protecting us in this case.
Well, it's actually the opposite. So
It's-
climate scientists are conservative
Yeah,
in the opposite way that a risk manager is conservative.
exactly.
And this is really true. So if you're a climate scientist and you think there might be 10 feet of sea level rise with a 40% probability, you think there'll be a 6 feet of sea level rise with a 75% probability, and you think there'll be 3 feet of sea level rise with a 3-foot probability, you're going to only publish about the 3 feet.
Yeah.
Because your risk to your reputation, if you're wrong, is far worse than not publishing something that turns out to be right.
Right, but the risk
So
to humanity is
you have to be 95% sure.
You
So
mean,
what you see
significance levels,
published is
Dan.
very
Yeah.
sure will happen. But a risk manager, you go, wait, 40% chance that every city in the world be wiped out? What do you? What?
Yeah, but
They're doing risk management. They're doing risk management on their own careers.
Yeah, but the point is that they're making they're different questions. So the scientist is talking about the probability of their scientific conjecture being true or false. The risk manager is talking about the harm, the risk of the harm that would arise. They're completely different things, but unfortunately they use, in many cases, the same language, so people confuse them.
Yeah,
correct.
Actually, two parallel conversations going on here, and people don't understand that they're not on the same track.
But you are not hearing how bad things could really be.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
it's not, they have to be sure about it.
But absolutely. But I think that one needs to understand that this is because it's not the scientist's job to assess the harm. That's a political, a normative question. He will tell you what the likelihood is of this happening or that happening. But what the social consequences of that would be, the political consequences are very difficult because.
But that's not the same though as like 10 feet of sea level rise versus 3 feet. That's a scientific question. The harm is, you can kind of imagine the harm, but it's still scientific.
Yeah, so, no, I understand that.
But Robert, the scientists say all the time that we must do it in a just way. So they're not being. Your contention is they're acting as scientists should, which is contradictory. But they aren't. They bring in immorality constantly.
Well,
Okay.
everyone has morality, but
I think
the morality of justice.
This is a big subject to start, literally as we're ending the meeting. So
yes,
we should put on the agenda for the next time round.
and Robert, you would probably be interested to know that in the steering circle, we are now planning a whole online conference later this year on the risk framing of climate change. And we believe that this deserves a whole lot more emphasis based on the actuaries report that came out a couple of months ago, and many other sources. And so we'll look forward to doing that. I think this discussion really emphasizes the importance of that. Well, let me thank Dan. It's been an extremely stimulating conversation, and I think my colleagues would agree with me that you are one of the most clear thinking and great communicating participants, speakers, colleagues that we've had as a feature on this forum, and I certainly am very, very grateful that you could join us. I would also like to look down the road. And I think we should continue collaborating on developing this more fleshed out and comprehensive climate plan, which you have been very forthright and courageous in putting on the table and emphasizing these 20 points over the last so many years. So I hope you'll join us as we move forward.
It would be great.
On doing
and thank
that.
you. It was a great discussion. It's great to talk to people that are so into it and know what's going on, and really appreciate it.